Okay, so I think we're going to get started. Hello and welcome to everyone who's joined us today, March 2nd, 2016, for our monthly webinar series for Foundation Maps. Today we're going to be focusing on funding for women's issues in spirit of Women's History Month in March and International Women's Day, March 8th. We thought this would be a great opportunity to showcase all of the grants data that we have in Foundation Maps that specifically looks at how foundations and funders are supporting women and women's issues. My name is Amanda Dillon, and I am Manager of Knowledge Services at Foundation Center. I've been at Foundation Center for about 4.5 years, and I have been working on the Foundation Maps platform for about the past 2 years. So I hope to demonstrate all of the great features and all of the data in the platform that you all have access to through either a subscription or by visiting one of our Funding Information Network partners and accessing the platform there. We're going to get started right away, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about what Foundation Maps is. As I can see from the poll results, several people have already used the platform once before, but still I think it's helpful to give a little bit of framing as to what Foundation Maps is, why it was built, what kinds of questions it can answer. So Foundation Maps is a data visualization platform for philanthropy. It's used and was designed for grants management and program staff at foundations, as well as development and program staff at nonprofits. We often find grant maker networks find a lot of value in it, as do consultants to donors and to foundations. Overall, it's used to find and visualize information about the social sector and philanthropy. So a couple of things that you can use it for are scanning the landscape to see who's funding what and where and how. You can use it to identify gaps in funding and to reveal sector and foundation trends. So before we dive in, and I'm just going to switch my screen so that I have the actual platform up on screen. Okay. So before we dive into a few examples and more specifically about our topic of funding for women's issues, I wanted to give a quick overview of what you're looking at on screen and just an overview of the interface in general. So on the left, you'll be able to switch different views of the Foundation Maps platform. So right now we're looking at the map view. You can also switch to look at all of the grants data in a list view. You can go to advanced search. You can look at charts where you can see trends, bar charts. There's also pathways, which is kind of like a 6 degrees of separation tool that shows connection between and among funders and grantees. And constellations, which is one of our newer features. That is like a network mapping tool. And then finally, there's save searches. So we're going to dive into those different features in just a second, but I also wanted to explain what you see here on the top. So on the top, you have the option of showing grants by recipient location, foundation location, and area served. So recipient location is what it sounds like, and actually that's the view that you see on screen right now. So the red bubbles indicate where recipients are located, and the size of the bubble indicates how many recipients are located in that particular region, country, city. So the bigger the bubble, the more recipients in that area. You can also switch the view so that you see foundation location. And so what's incredible is you can see we have a large collection of data on foundations, not just based in the United States, but really all over the world. And then finally, you can also look at grants data on the map by area served. So what we mean by this is that we're not looking at grants going to recipients based solely on where that recipient is headquartered, but you're looking at grants on the map based on where the work in the grant is happening. So for example, if a recipient were receiving a grant for work in India, the grant would show up in India and not in the United States where the recipient is located. So this is also a newer feature of Foundation Maps, and it really allows us to see where work is happening versus where just the recipients are located. You can also set the location of where you're interested in searching. So this will apply to where the recipient is located, where the foundation is located, or where the grant is serving. So if you're just interested in looking for grants based in Brazil, you would type Brazil in here. If you were looking for information based on recipients just based in Brazil, you would type recipient in here and change the showing grants by selection accordingly. You can also filter your results by selecting a subject area that's based on Foundation Center's philanthropy classification system. And this is a system we developed with others in the sector to standardize and classify the grants data that we collect. And I highly encourage you all to learn more about this system by looking at our website, taxonomy.foundationcenter.org. It's a very robust system with several different facets. You can search by different terms and find out where is the best kind of area to look for that bit of knowledge. So if you're unfamiliar with our philanthropy classification system, I highly encourage you again to take a look at taxonomy.foundationcenter.org. You can also, if you're not sure what to type into the subject area here, you can also browse our taxonomy, our subject taxonomy, by clicking Browse All Subjects. And as you can see, it'll list all of our various categories here, and by clicking on any of them, you can continue to drill down and refine the area of interest that you're looking under. And then finally, there is this More Filters drop down here. And in this drop down, you'll be able to look at grants by population served. So this is actually where we're going to spend some time looking today as it relates to women's issues. You can also look at grants by support strategy. So was this grant a capital grant? Was it a grant for general support? Was it for outreach purposes, for policy and advocacy and system reforms? This can allow you to target types of grants or target types of funders that support funding in these various support areas. Next, we have organization name. So if you're really just interested in finding out more information about a particular foundation or a particular nonprofit or recipient, you can just type in their name here. There's also the ability to look at grants by grant amount. So say you want to focus on foundations that only make smaller grants because perhaps you're more of a grassroots organization or an organization that's just starting out and need to find which foundations support maybe some more seed funding type grants. You can look for that here, or if you're interested in only foundations that would provide multi-million-dollar gifts, you can also look by grant amount here, $500K or more. As you can see, we have grants data back starting in 2006 on Foundation Maps and going all the way to present. So we're very happy that we have grants already for 2016 from several foundations who have chosen to report their grants electronically to Foundation Center. And I can talk a little bit more about that later. You can also search grants by transaction type. And what's really fantastic about this is that we're not just looking at grants anymore that are cash grants or that are traditional philanthropic gifts in terms of the way that they're given. We also have now the ability to look at grants by, for example, matching gifts. We're starting to track some foundation-administered programs, so when the foundation is giving a grant to one of their own programs. We're also starting to track mission-related investment and loan grants and also program-related investment and loan grants. So this is a pretty robust list to pick from. And then finally, we have grant maker type here that allows you to search based on the grant maker type. So suppose you're only interested in seeing how community foundations support women's issues. You can select that here. And then finally, you can also filter by keyword. So if you're looking for a particular topic or phrase that doesn't appear in our subject area or population served, you can type in that keyword here. So that's a little bit about how you can search the platform and the data. And so to give you a sense of what you're looking at on screen, right now you can see that in our database on Foundation Maps, we have 4.2 million grants, again starting in 2006. That is totaling $268 billion of grants. It's such a big number that I even sometimes trip up when I read it. And then we also have records on over 60,000 foundations going to 382,000 recipients. And one note I will say is that these numbers are going to grow very rapidly because of Foundation Center's new ways of processing grants data, which is going to really increase the volume of grants that gets added to this platform every year. And so it's going to be incredible, in 2016 to see, I'm sure this number jump closer to about 5 million grants. So with that, I'm going to just dive in and start to look at a few scenarios as to how you can start searching Foundation Maps for grants related to women's issues. So there are several ways to do it, but I'm going to bring us back to the More Filters drop-down. So under More Filters, there's Population Served, and under Population Served, there are these various categories. And as you can see, under age groups, we have the term females. And so I'm just going to click females here and click out of the menu to see the grants data refresh. And so you can see that we have 277,000 grants tagged with the term, this grant is serving a female population. And that's totaling $17 billion coming from 20,000 funders who are supporting some kind of program or initiative with a female lens. And again, going to 32,000 recipients. So this can give you a sense of the sheer scope and volume of grants data we have on this population area. And so right now the map is in the area served view, and so what you're looking at is essentially a heat map. And so it shows the darker the color, the higher the concentration and the higher the number of grants going to that country for grants that serve a female population. And you can click on any of these countries to pull up a little 4-box summary on specifics and statistics related to that country. So it looks like $12.4 billion of the grants data we have serving female populations is aimed at the United States. And another, darkly shaded country on the map is India. And so you can see we have about $640 million going to India for grants that serve female populations. So again, you can switch through all of these to see, well, where are the foundations that are giving these kinds of grants located? And again, it looks like all over the world. And again, you can switch to recipients to see where these recipients who are receiving grants for women and females are located. So I want us to just switch quickly now to look at the list, because some of the questions we may have are, well, who are those top foundations who are supporting issues for women? And so with this list, you can see foundations, the top 10 foundations. A lot of these may be familiar. So Gates comes up at the top, the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation, Ford, Hewlett, Packard, Novo Foundation, Big Lottery Fund, Comic Relief, the MacArthur Foundation, and the Avon Foundation for Women round out the top 10 funders that we have records of giving grants to serve female populations. And we can also click the recipient tab here to take a look at, well, who are the top recipients for women's support? And so you can see we have PATH, Population Services International, Planned Parenthood, CARE USA, IPAS, Marie Stopes, Johns Hopkins, National Abortion Federation, International Partnership for Microbicides, and the Nike Foundation. And right now, these grants are being sorted, these recipients are being sorted by dollar value of grants. You can also click on any of these headers, both in this tab and the foundation tab, to see, to sort by the column headers. So it looks like in terms of total number of grants being received, Planned Parenthood is actually the top recipient of foundation grants for women's issues. And you can also sort by city, by recipient name, by country. We can also click on the grants tab to see, if we were to look at all of these grants, which would be the ones receiving the top amounts of the highest grants. So it looks like the highest grants that we have in our database are from the Gates Foundation to PATH. You can also sort, if you're curious about finding out, well, what were some of the most recent grants given. We can see, as I mentioned, we have some 2016 data. And so we have a grant from the Noyce Foundation to the University of San Diego for $12 million given in 2016. And what you can also do, if you're curious on finding out more details about these grants, is clicking the details icon here, and that will pull up a grant description. And so we can see the Weingart Foundation, based in Los Angeles, gave St. Anne's Maternity Home $500,000 this year for the purpose of capital support for Beverly Terrace. And it looks like that is a shelter and residential care that specifically focuses on female adolescents, female young adults, homeless people, low income and poor people. And it's a cash grant. And you'll notice this eGrant icon here. And what that means is that this grant information and this grant detail was given to us directly by the Weingart Foundation in an electronic file. And through the electronic grant program, we are able to capture, as I mentioned, the most recent grants data from the foundations in a way in which they would want to tell a story about their grant making. And so this varies, or this is different from the way we collect grants data from 990 forms, which is looking at a 990 document that has been submitted to the IRS and then released by the IRS. And for anyone who's ever looked at those forms or knows a bit about the 990 forms, by the time they're published, they're about 2 years old. And so a lot of times they're also only filled out for compliance reasons, so the grant descriptions aren't as robust or as detailed. We don't get as much information on, for example, population served or the geographic area served. So they're a bit limiting. So we really encourage all foundations to submit their grants data electronically so we can paint a very complete and accurate picture on philanthropy. So that's just a little bit about the electronic grant reporting program. So I've taken you through a list of how you can search, and take a look at the grants data through the list. what I want to do now is I want to focus in on a few more specific populations than just females. So I'm actually going to clear this females tab, and I'm going to go back into more filters and go under population served. So one of the populations that we hear about often in regards to women are single parents and single mothers. So if we go under family relationships, another area in which you may find grants related to women's issues are under parents. And here I'm going to click single parents. And this doesn't mean this is necessarily going specifically to women, but I'm going to then combine it actually with the females tab. So now we're looking more targetedly at grants that are going to support single mothers and single women. So I'm going to switch back to the Foundations tab, because what I can do here now is see how this list has changed. And then beyond that, I just want to zoom in on one of these foundations. So as you can see, by clicking any of the grant maker names, you pull up a profile on that grant maker. So we can see the Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation, their basic contact information, their basic financial data for this, in this case, year ending 2014. And then with each of our foundation records, we get a mission, background, synthesis or synopsis of their grant-making programs. We can also pull up a list of their grants specifically. And this, again, as you can see, is in support of females or single parents. And then what you can also do is you can get a sense of, their giving among different subject areas. So where the Buffett Foundation focused specifically on females and single parents was in health, human rights, and education. And this is looking at their grant making starting in 2006. But if we want to see how giving for this population has changed over the years, we can actually click that year button here. And then this play button will appear in the middle. And so I'm just going to click that, because then we'll see how grants across these various categories have changed over time. And this is a really great tool because it's reflecting where the grant making went. And so you can see if a grant maker is entering a new area of funding, if they're supporting an issue, for the first time, or if they've been supporting that issue for some time. Or it can also tell you if they're leaving that issue, if they're maybe making less grants toward that. So that's a useful tool. Okay, so that's list. So another issue area I think that we can take a look at under the population served are under work status and occupations. So if you look, we have several various work status and occupations, and down below we also have a category called sex workers. So I'm going to click on that category, and again, starting with the list, just getting a sense of, okay, what's the landscape look like? Who are the top funders? You can see how that contrasts from the top funders that support issues for women broadly. You can see who the top recipients are as well. So you can see how that's changed as well. And you can also see, again, a top list of grants. So what I want to do now is I want to show you how to use this tool Pathways using this lens. So I'm going to focus on the EVOS Foundation, and I'm going to click Pathways here. And what Pathways allows you to do is it allows you to identify cohorts, and it also allows you to do some prospecting. So right now we have EVOS in the first position, and just to give you guys a sense of what you're looking at, the blue bars represent foundations, and so EVOS is giving funding to GWL, ENA, UHAI, and South India AIDS Action Program, and this is for in support of sex workers. So these are their top 3 recipients for this type of funding. And then what you can see one step over is of these top 3 recipients that they have, who are the other top funders who are giving to these top 3 recipients. And beyond that, who are these top funders giving to that EVOS is not giving to for this type of funding. And so looking at this gives you, first off, kind of a sense of how you may be connected to various different foundations, but it also can help you determine, well, if I'm supporting this cohort of recipients and these other foundations are also supporting this cohort of recipients, and they're also supporting this cohort on the very right of recipients, perhaps I might be interested in funding these recipients on the very right because they're probably doing work that, that I would be interested in. You can also move any of these recipients over into this first position and use this as a prospecting tool. So let me go back to this list and go to recipients. And here I'm just going to go to the Young Women's Empowerment Project. And so if you're the Young Women's Empowerment Project or you're a recipient like them, then you can take a look at your top funders. You can take a look at your top funders' other top recipients receiving grants for this type of work, and then you can look at their top funders. And so you might look at this and say, well, hey, this group of foundations is supporting recipients that are doing similar work to me, and so they might be interested in some of my work. So this is a great tool to use for prospecting, but also if you're a foundation, you can also look to see who might be a natural collaborator, who might be a partner on a new initiative, who might have some insight or information that they can tell me about if I'm curious about a recipient that they're funding. So I'm going to now take a look at another population that I believe when I looked at the list of registrants for this webinar came up. Again, under age groups here, I'm going to go into females, and I'm going to this time select female children and youth. So, and what's interesting here, I didn't even clear out of sex workers, but as you can see, this list totally changes, and now I'm looking at not just grants supporting issues related to sex workers, but grants related to issues supporting sex workers and female children and youth. So that's something interesting that you can combine a lot of these filters to find out more information. So going to clear out of sex workers now and just take a look at the top funders for female children and youth, so girls. So as you can see, this list has changed again. Some foundations are still on this list, but there's some new ones that have shown up in the top 10. And again, taking a look, scanning the landscape, seeing who are the top recipients. So as you can see, this focuses on recipients across the world, and so a lot of boys and girls clubs of Boston and America. But say I'm interested in finding out only grants that are going to recipients based in Brazil. So who are those top recipients? So as you can see, several recipients based only in Brazil show up on this list. And we can see who are the top funders who are giving to issues for women and girls based in Brazil. And then what I want to do is I want to show you constellations, because what constellations does is it gives you a better view of the ecosystem of this type of funding. So, and I'm going to change, instead of showing grants by recipients based in Brazil, I'm going to show grants by area served in Brazil. So this means that regardless of whether the recipient is based in Brazil, this is going to capture recipients who are working in Brazil. So nonprofits working in Brazil, regardless of whether they're based there or not. They could be based anywhere in the world. And so what you're seeing on screen is blue bubbles, which represent the foundations, and red bubbles, which represent the recipients. And you can kind of pull these apart and start to get a sense of who is working on initiatives based on women and girls in Brazil, and who are some of the top funders, and who are some of the top recipients, and how are they all connected. And so what I see here, in fact, is that there seems to be a lot of disconnect, lots of foundations funding recipients in silos, not too much overlap at all. And this really varies as you move from country to country and topic to topic. In some cases, you'll see these landscapes, these ecosystem maps, and you'll see that foundations are funding recipients in common, and that there's a lot of overlap, and that everyone is really tightly connected. And then in other cases like this, you'll see that there's a lot of disconnect, a lot of people working in silos. So, for example, we have this focused on Brazil, but I know that there are some people on the call today who are based in Mexico. So let's see how that landscape and ecosystem changes versus support in Mexico. So first off, you can see that we have a lot more data here on what's happening for funding going to women, going to girls and adolescents in Mexico. And so you can see that there is a lot of interconnectedness here, as I was mentioning. So several foundations are funding recipients that other foundations are funding, and lots of recipients are receiving grants from several foundations. And so this shows a fairly healthy kind of an interconnected network, but you can still see that there are some big players who are off on the side, not really funding recipients that are being funded by a lot of other foundations. And in the Constellation view, what you can do is you can click on any of these links to pull up a description of those grants. So, for example, this is showing grants going from Universidad La Salle Cuernavaca to Casa Hogar de Nuestra Santísima Trinidad. And so we can click on detail to see a little bit more. So sometimes with the international data, we have a little bit less details, but you can still get a sense of when the grant was given and how much was going to that. And again, if you want to look more at any of the recipients or the foundations, you can click on the bubble and pull up more information. So who is the MacArthur Foundation giving to in Mexico or working in Mexico for girls' issues? And so you'll pull up a list here. So this is just an overview of how you can start to understand the either siloed or very interconnected ecosystem of foundations around any issue. Here it is, female, children, and youth. So we've looked a lot now at how foundations have indicated they're serving these various populations related to women. But we can also, and I'm going to go back to the map, we have a couple of subject areas that are also related to women's issues. And so, for example, women's rights is an issue area that you can search on. So as you can see, I just typed it here into the subject area. If you knew our taxonomy and knew exactly where to find that, you could go into Browse All Subjects and search for it there. But you can also just type it in here and then select it from the drop-down when it appears. And so what's interesting here is that you can see it looks like there's grant making going to support women's rights all over the world, but you can see particular hotspots and how this varies from how we saw grant making going just to support women. So it looks like Brazil has a lot more funding specifically for women's rights, South Africa, Kenya. We also have Ghana as a place that's receiving a lot of grants for women's rights, India, China, Indonesia. So this gives you a sense of the landscape, but it also lets you know for some of those lighter shaded countries where there's not a lot of grant making going for women's rights. Another issue area that you can search for under subjects is women's services. And again, you can see that it's under a different category, but here it comes under special population support. So I'm going to click women's services. And to find the definition of all of the terms, both under subject area, but also population served, again, you can visit taxonomy.foundationcenter.org, and that will provide you information on what these terms mean specifically. And so you can see now women's services, how that's varied. So a lot of support going to the UK, support going here to Sierra Leone, which didn't pop up looking at women's rights, but it does for women's services. And if we're curious to see, well, who's receiving that type of support and who's making those types of grants, we can see the Tides Foundation, Newfield Foundation, the Africa Women's Development Fund, Global Fund for Women, VGIF. These are all foundations that didn't necessarily pop up in our other lists, but are giving to Africa, specifically to Sierra Leone. We can see the top funders. So what's interesting here is that all of these recipients are based in Sierra Leone, and then we can see the grant examples. So how are these grants being given for what? And so we can see here, this was given to a women's co-op for organizational development. So here you can see program development for women's services. And then finally, the third subject area category that I wanted to let everyone on the webinar today know about is women's studies, actually. So we have women's rights, women's services, and also women's studies come up in subject area. And so as you can see, again, the picture of funding and the concentrations of funding change. So now we see that Egypt really pops up for women's studies. And so I'm curious to see, well, who is funding women's studies in Egypt? So Ford Foundation, Open Society, the Smith Richardson Foundation, and who are some of those top recipients? So Women in Memory Forum, NASRA for Feminist Studies, American Islamic Congress, Center for Arab Women and Training and Research. And again, we can take a look at what some of those grants were. So if we click on this top grant given by Open Society, we can see that this was to promote Egyptian feminist movement that will lead to social and political freedom. And as with all of these, it's always interesting to see the geographic dispersion of grants and looking at the list, but then also looking at how these networks are connected. So in this case, this looks a bit like medium connectivity, I would say, compared to the last constellations we looked at. So still more connected than the first one we looked at, but not as interconnected as the last one. So the big players here are really the Ford Foundation, the International Center for Research on Women. And with any of these, if I were to pull up, for example, the recipient, I can actually click on the recipient name And I will have information, basic contact information on them, and then also a link to their website. So if I was curious to find out a little bit more on how they're working on their current initiatives, then I could click over to their website and look them up specifically. So with 15 minutes left in our hour, I'm actually going to pause here. And I want to open it up for questions. And I'm also happy to do any additional demonstrations on specific different issues related to women's issues. So why don't we begin to take questions? Okay, so Erin, are there any questions that that have popped up on screen?
Yep, so we have one that is Foundation Maps available with Foundation Directory Online.
Okay, so that's a good question, and it might be confusing for those who have heard a lot about Foundation Directory Online for many years. So Foundation Maps is actually a new and separate platform, and it was designed to be a bit more of a visual resource for foundations and nonprofits. One thing that I didn't show, but I'm actually just going to take the time to go back and show now, is what we've done is we've brought in the ability to create PDFs out of any of these visualizations, and a lot of foundations and nonprofits tend to use those PDFs in either their board books or in proposals to foundations to really kind of bolster their points, their argument. So that's a really nice feature. With that, Foundation Directory Online is a separate subscription, and so you can subscribe to that, which is a bit more, we found, for the grant seeker audience, because it provides a lot of information on what it takes to apply to a foundation, whereas Foundation Maps is, again, a bit more about visualizing philanthropy. It allows you to see trends. It allows you to discover gaps in funding. It allows you to come to conclusions kind of about the state of philanthropy in a way that's very different than Foundation Directory Online. So there are different subscriptions for those who are visiting Foundation Directory Online through their local funding information network partners. They can access both databases there. And for those who don't know what funding information network partner means, it's one of our resources in which we provide access to the general public for our resources, and the way that you can find out where those locations exist near you. We have about 470 around the world where you can access Foundation Maps and Foundation Directory Online, and several of our other resources. You can go to our website and click Find Us, and you'll be able to type in your location and find the one nearest to you. Or you can, if you prefer to have access to this at your home or on your desktop, then you can purchase an annual subscription. So FDO and Foundation Maps are separate.
Great. So the next question we have is if we have a women in climate change filter, a way of getting at that data that shows a focus on the SDGs.
So that's a really, that's a great question. So one thing that I didn't go into, but this question is the perfect opportunity to showcase that. So the benefit of actually having women as a population served, or females as we call it, as a population served, and not solely as a subject area, is that it means that we can look at women's populations or grants supporting women's populations across any of these subject areas. So I'm actually going to, I have female selected as you see here, and then I can type in climate here because that's more of a subject area. So I'm going to select climate change, and now you're going to be looking at grants going to support women at the intersection of climate change. And so we were on the constellation view, so this gives you an idea of what that ecosystem looks like. So there's some interconnectivity, but sometimes this kind of information is just easier looked at through a list. So let's see who the top funders are who are giving grants for climate change in support of females. So Rockefeller, Comic Relief, Ford, Big Lottery Fund, the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation. And we can take a look at who those top recipients are. So CARE, Cafe Direct, Producers Foundation, this recipient based in India, Mary Robinson Foundation. And again, we can take a look at these grants and the specific nature of the grants. So this is a grant from the Seattle Foundation to Climate Solutions. And so what you can see here is this grant was given last year specifically for a women climate communications project. And so as you can see, that's why the grant was tagged with population served females. And so this sounds like something that would be really interesting to find out more about how they're implementing this project. So what you could either do is click back to recipients, find, or you can go back to grants, so Climate Solutions, and so you can find their profile here. So even though they received one of the most recent grants, they don't come up. Here they are on the second tab. So click on their name and then click over to their website. And so you can find out a little bit more about that initiative that's mentioned here. So, so that was a good question, because what it shows is that you can search for grants going to women, not just women in general, but depending on what issue area you're looking at, you can select that here. So it might be funding for women and education, funding for women and arts and culture, or funding for women and health. The ability to, as I said, kind of layer on the various facets of data here make this kind of search really robust.
Great, and this is kind of a related question. Is violence against women and girls a subject area that can be searched? And if so, is it possible to distinguish between funding for service provision and advocacy policy work?
Okay, another really great question, also something that I didn't explore quite yet with the tool. Sometimes I feel like this tool is so robust, in a short hour you don't get to cover everything. But so what I would suggest for searching on that criteria is going to population served, and then going to social and economic status, and then under that you'll find victims and oppressed people. And here you can see victims of crime and abuse. And while this isn't specifically women, what we tend to see is that a lot of the grants for this type of funding do go to women. So I would click on that to begin with. And so you can see who the top funders for supporting programs for victims of crime and abuse. They pop up here. And then to your question of advocacy and policy, support strategy, which is something that I mentioned at the very beginning, is the way that you would be able to see, well, what programs are being funded for policy advocacy and systems reform. So I'm going to click that here. And so you can see how this list has now changed again. So it looks like the top funder we have for that is the Anna E. Casey Foundation. And so if I were to figure out or want to find out what kinds of grants they're making around this issue area with this type of support in mind, that policy change advocacy, you can see what kinds of grants they've given. And I'm just going to sort by year. So it looks like in 2015 we have record of them giving a grant for voices for children in Nebraska. And so I'm just going to open that up to see what this is. So this one looks like it's more for, it doesn't say specifically for women, but it is for policy and advocacy systems reform for victims of crime and abuse. Perhaps we can take a look at another foundation, and we could also layer on the female population served, but I'm just going to click onto recipients to see if we can find another one. And you can keep searching, tabbing through with these numbers on the bottom here. So here's a recipient, Battered Women's Resource Center based in New York City. So if I click on them, it looks like they've received some grants from the Mertz Gilmore Foundation, the Daphne Foundation, Ben & Jerry's Foundation, JP Morgan Chase. And if I want to see a little bit more about any of those grant descriptions, so this is for abuse prevention specifically. Again, the population served is females, low-income and poor people, victims of crime abuse. And this grant was for systems reform, program development, and continuing support. And as you can see, the grant description is for Voices of Women Organizing Project, which brings together survivors of domestic violence to improve systems that abused women and their children turn to for safety and justice. So a really nice, robust grant description. And again, if you find the recipient name in Foundation Maps, you can find a link to their website, so you can find out both more about the foundation and also the nonprofit.
Great. So another question is, can I only access this mapping platform by purchasing a subscription?
Okay, good question. So no, that's not the only way you can access it. As I mentioned a little bit before, you can visit one of our over 470 funding information network partners. And so the way that you can find out who or where they are, so they're usually libraries or universities or some nonprofits. If you go to our homepage, foundationcenter.org, and then click on Find Us, then you'll be able to type in your location, so your zip code, your city, and a list of nearby partners will show up. And at their locations, there will be a computer there with links to Foundation Maps for free access and Foundation Directory Online for free access. But really the easiest way is to do an online subscription, because then you can access it from your desk at any time. And so then you're not limited by having to find a location near you, which might have limited hours.
Great. And is there anything, can we search specifically for women or female veterans?
Oh, that's a good question. So let's take a look, actually. So I'm going to X out of these. And so again, under population served, one thing I just want to point out in general, location and subject area served are the most prominent ways to search the data because they're showing up here top center. But there's a lot of value in looking under more filters, because that is really when you can start to find some of the more nuanced grants, like grants for veterans. So here we have work status and occupation. And so as you can see, if you scroll down to the bottom, here's the veterans link. And so there's veterans, and I'm also going to go back to age group and click females. And so as you can see, now we're looking at both veterans and females. And right now, what I actually believe is that the search for, if you layer the population, is going to search either veterans or females. So what I would do is I would keep the females, and then I would type veterans in here as a keyword search. And let's click search. And so now what you'll do is you'll search veterans within grants that are tagged with female. So as we can see, these are some top recipients that pop up. And if we want to take a look at some of the grants, let's take a look at this one. So from Fairfield County Community Foundation to Northern California Institute for Research and Education. And so if we look here, this was to support the second phase of Women Warriors work in the Veterans Health and Integration Program portfolio. So this is looking at the intersection of females and veterans. So there's so many different ways to search the platform. Taking a little bit of time and playing around with the various filters here under more filters is really going to help you find those grants that are really more targeted. And so with that, because we're coming close to the end of the hour, and I don't think I answered all of the questions that were put up on in the QA, I want to thank you for attending the presentation today. To find out more information about maps.foundationcenter, to find out more information about Foundation Maps, you can check out maps.foundationcenter.org. Feel free to take the poll that's up on screen, and if you didn't get any of your questions answered during this hour, feel free to type them into the what additional questions do you have box, and we will do our best to reply to you, get in touch with you following this webinar. So thank you everyone for attending. I hope that this was helpful, and we're here to answer questions for you after the webinar ends. Thank you.